Welcome to the closing general session of the 2014 AACC International Annual Meeting. Once again, please welcome the President of AACC International, Jan Delcourt.
Welcome to the closing session of the 2014 annual meeting. An incredible meeting is coming to an end, and I hope you are all as invigorated as I was by the program. Thanks once again to all volunteers who made it possible. For our closing session today, and in preparation of our centennial meeting next year, Peter Shewry will examine the advances in serial research during the second 50 years of AACCI's 100-year history. Peter is a most respected scientist and authority in the field. So Peter, thank you so much for having accepted the invitation to present a keynote lecture today. We will also present a number of awards which will acknowledge achievements by some of our members during the past year. But first, during the opening session, I challenged all of you to share your key scientific terms and concepts which will define the next 100 years of serious science and innovation. I am so pleased that many of you participated in the poll. So please check out this quick highlight of our ideas. The list made is impressive. Words like health, words like sustainability, they all come to the foreground. This is a great start to look forward for the next 100 years. So therefore, now join me as we salute and toast the next portion of our AACC International Centennial Kickoff with our diamond daiquiris. Cheers. As I mentioned during Sunday's opening session, the Texture Technologies Quality Research Award is awarded annually to two authors who either write or present high-quality research which broadly involves instrumental texture analysis. The 2014 Best Presentation Award goes to presenting poster author Ali Salimi Khorshidi from the University of Manitoba. Is Ali here? The Cecil F. Pinney Travel Award is given to professionals or for professionals to attend the AACCI annual meeting. The award also provides a complimentary ACCI division membership and free registration to the annual meeting. This award is administered by the AACCI Foundation and was made possible by a generous donation from Cecil F. Pinney, whose membership with AACCI spent his career from 1943 to 1999. This year, we are pleased to announce the recipient of the Cecil F. Pinney Award. Bram Parade, please stand up. Bram is a postdoctoral research fellow at KU Leuven in our own group. Congratulations, Bram. Another applause for him. Let's now move to the Best Student Research Paper competition. One of the highlights of the meeting is the opportunity to see the impressive work of our students. At this time, I would like to recognize the finalists of AACCI's annual Best Student Research Paper Competition. This competition is organized by the Professional Development Panel, which is chaired by Sean Finney. It challenges students to demonstrate superior presentation skills and highlights some of their most outstanding research. These top 6 student finalists represent the cream of the crop in terms of research. Would you please stand at your seats as I call your name? Dorothy Herman from Texas A&M, Syed Samir Hussain from Punjab Agricultural University, Jacob Kamerad from Montana State University, Mihiri Marini Mendis from North Dakota State University, Monika Schafarczyk from the German Research Center for Food Chemistry, and Christoph Verheyen from the Technische Universität München. On behalf of the AACCI Professional Development Panel and the members of the association, I would like to congratulate all of you on achieving finalist status in this competition. I am now pleased to announce the 3 winners of this week's competition and ask them to come to the stage as I call their name. Winning 3rd place in this competition is Dorothy Herman from Texas A&M. In 2nd place this year, we have Monika Schafarczyk from the German Research Center for Food Chemistry. And the 1st place, and I hope the winner is also here, the 1st place winner of the 2014 Best Student Research Paper Competition is Mihiri Marini Mendis from North Dakota State University. Let's now move to the Student Product Development Competition. This year, the Student Division organized an exceptional Student Product Development Competition. 5 teams from 5 different universities entered into the competition. Please stand as I name your team and your project. Monterey Tech University with a project Chisex with ancestral nutrition for today's life. Texas A&M University with Southern Pea Hummus. University of Florida with Andean Joy Red and White Blend Quinoa Herbal Tea. The University of Nebraska with GNB 20 Plus Home Style Instant Noodle with 20% bean flour. University of Parma, finally, Parma, Italy, with Bingo. Bet you like it. I am honored to present the winners of the 2014 Student Product Development Competition. Would you please come to the stage as I call your name? Product Development Competition, 3rd place. University of Florida with And They Enjoy Red and White Blend Quinoa Herbal Tea. Team not here? Second place, Texas A&M University with Southern Pea Hummus. And probably no surprise with a chosen title, which they chose, University of Parma, Italy with Bingo. Bet you like it. The first winner is a one-person team, so additional congratulations for having done this. Also thanks to Sean Finney, of course. Travel awardees. Thanks to the efforts of the Manhattan section and the Association's Foundation, as well as multiple contributions by individual and organizational donors, 73 students have each been awarded $200 to aid in their travel expenses to come to the meeting. Here on the photo, they are with their checks in hand. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see the association support these emerging leaders, and we certainly look forward to their involvement and participation in the years to come. With the close of the meeting, it is time to recognize our outgoing board members. Please join me in recognizing Directors Marta Isidorczyk and Don Sullins, whose great work and dedication have been greatly appreciated. And now, after a full year, it's time for me to pass the presidential gavel on to our incoming president. I'm pleased and excited to hand over the gavel to my good friend and colleague, Jared Downey, to begin his term as president. I am very confident that he will serve us in a most excellent way. With this, I turn the podium over to our new president, Jared Downey, and please give him a warm applause.
Thank you, Jan. I know I have some very big shoes to fill, but I'll do my best. Let me begin by saying how honored I am to be elected to this position in AACCI. When I first joined as long ago as the late 1970s, it never occurred to me that I'd be here speaking to you as your president. But here I am, and I undertake to do my very best for all of you and the association. One of the characteristics of AACCI that I've always been struck by is the emphasis on individual contributions from members. Against the background of significant changes in the age profile and professional interests of our membership, in the coming year, I'm committed to continuing the board's efforts to increase member engagement by encouraging their greater involvement in the organisation and its initiatives. To those older hands in the audience, I encourage you to ask younger people to contribute to your project wherever possible. Very many of AACCI's board members actually began their active involvement through just such an invitation, and they've all spoken to me of the positive impact it had on their professional development. If you would like suggestions for people to involve, I invite you to contact AACCI Headquarters Membership Department. I'd also like to extend a special word to our new and younger members in the audience and beyond. If you see something in our activities list that interests you, please contact whoever is responsible for it and ask to be involved. And conversely, if there's something that interests you but doesn't appear to be listed, contact AACCI Headquarters with your suggestion, and we'll make sure something is done about it. If there's an initiative you'd like to discuss with me personally, I am here to listen. Another important development in the coming year will be the establishment of closer cooperation and collaboration between AACCI and ICC. Details of this have already been announced after our board meeting and the General Assembly of ICC here in Providence. And at this moment, I'd like to extend an invitation to the President of ICC, Dr. Joël Abécassis, to join me here on the podium and make a short address to you all.
So thank you, Mr. President, as you are now, for inviting me and coming to the stage. I realized that it is not just an announcement that we have to do, but it is a commitment in front of all of you. And on the behalf of ICC, I would like to tell you that we are engaging this process to look for a potential joint future between our two organizations, with the aim to better meet the needs of all the members of the Cyril family. But to succeed, we will need your support. So thank you in advance for your help.
Merci, Joël. In conclusion, given the wide range of activities planned for 2014-2015, I look forward to an interesting year as your president. And remember, I am always available to help wherever and whenever I can. Joining me this year on the AACCI board are new members, Lydia Midnes, who will serve as president-elect, two new directors, John Fabian and Jennifer Robinson, will start their 3-year terms on the board, and I look forward to working with all of you. 2015 is the celebration year for AACC International's 100 years. And as Jan mentioned earlier, last year we honoured our first 50 years. This afternoon we are taking a look at the last 50 years of serial science with our friend and colleague Peter Shuri. Peter will take us through the achievements from 1966 to 2014, acknowledging the legacy of previous generations and also pointing out some of our challenges from the future. Please join me in welcoming Peter Shurey.
Well, thank you. How do you talk about 50 years in 25 minutes? I think I was so flattered when I was invited to do this, I didn't realize how difficult it was. Firstly, you can upset a lot of people by omitting their names and their work, but also a massive amount of work over the period. So I decided to do what I wanted to do, talk about things I'm interested in, things that I've enjoyed doing, be a bit nostalgic, and look forward as well to perhaps the future. I think the first point I'd like to make is that 50 years is just half of the age of AACC, and it's a continuity. I was lucky enough to start working in serial chemistry in the late 1970s, so I crossed over with some of the people on this list here. People like Joe Wall was still working. I shared a lab with Del Meekin for a year at the Western Lab at Albany, and so there's that continuity of the old and new generations, and I was the new generation then. I was also very proud to get the Osborne Medal myself a few years ago because of the continuity, to think that Osborne had got it himself in 1920 and 28, and that we went back that far. And so I'll look back and I'll look forward at the same time. We've had a tremendous advance in 1964. I started by thinking how much we knew, and then I realized that it was really easy to say what we didn't know. We didn't know anything about genes, about sequences, about loci. What we've had is really big advances in technologies, and the technologies have driven the science, at least for the first 20 or 30 years. So protein chemistry, protein sequencing, 3D structured determination, high-resolution methods of analysis, electrophoresis going through into HPLC, things like this SDS page, and then 20 or 30 years ago going into gene technologies, and at the same time interacting with new advances in spectroscopy, so everything can be done at a much finer level, much greater resolution. If we look at some of the timelines, 1963, just over 50 years ago, the first starch gels were run. So we were first beginning to resolve sweet gluten into proteins, individual bands. This was used for some genetics. The high-resolution 2D systems came in for wheat proteins, certainly in the 1970s, early 1980s. And then people like Don Casada, Jerry Beats started applying protein sequencing. The first complete gliding sequence we had, Don Casada worked for 14 years on it. I was in his lab at the time, and he was stuck on 14 glutamine residues and couldn't get through them by classical sequencing, and he waited for DNA technology. But it came, we got our first sequences, we started producing transgenic crops, and to some extent we began commercializing them. I'll talk about that later, and we started getting genome sequences. So these have driven the science very largely. And the early pioneers, I think, were the people that were very quick to pick up on new technologies. I thought it'd be nice to use pictures of Osborne medals to recognize some of the pioneers. On the left, Del Meekin still working in the lab with a very young Don Casada. Colin Wrigley, Ken Shepherd was one of the great unsung sort of heroes, I think, of early protein chemistry, early protein genetics. It's Walter Bushak. Jean-Claude Autran developed electrophoresis to identify gliadins in the early 1970s. It was the first electrophoresis that I saw, at least that I could understand, and he had a massive impact. And then the group at Peoria, initially Joe Wall, but also obviously Jerry Beats, and I think we were all sad when Jerry died about 2 weeks ago. He was a great guy, in the heart of the AACC, I think, when he came to meetings. And you look at our labs, see what's changed in the labs. On the left-hand side, there's a lab in Australia. Well, Australia's always been a bit behind, but even so, one from the 1950s. And there's a reproduction of a lab from Rothamsted. And then this is our metabolomics lab at Rothamsted in 2014. So you can see how the technologies advance, and you can see why it's driven the science. On the other hand, we knew quite a lot at a different level. In 1964, I think we knew you could divide gluten into gliadin and gluten's, and we knew a lot about the properties of the individual fractions. We didn't know what the components were. We didn't know how many components there were, what their sequences were. But we knew a lot about the rheology. There were people doing early biophysical studies, things like ORD before CD was invented. We knew a lot about functionality, but we hadn't actually separated them down into components. We tend to ignore that work, I think, from 50 years ago. And I think in a lot of areas we don't know any more than they discovered with, I think, fairly crude and old-fashioned methods, but very good quality protein chemistry, particularly the group at Peoria, led by Joe Wall, and the group at Albany in California. I mentioned electrophoresis. I struggled to get, I had an immense amount of fun putting this talk together because I had to get hold of old journals and scan pictures, etc. Some of the electrophoresis there from Jean-Claude Autran, early starch gels, polyacrylamide. The work of Ken Shepard and Colleen Wrigley, where they're actually not only resolving gluten proteins but assigning them to genes in 1973. Almost impossible to get hold of the annals of the New York Academy of Sciences nowadays, but it's a seminal paper which should be read a lot more. And then going into the more modern methods, SDS page, IF SDS page. So we're beginning to pull gluten apart. And I should have said at the beginning, of course, I work on wheat. I spent 30 years working on gluten, so you'll hear more than you want to about wheat gluten, because I know a lot more about it. But I think a lot of the advances were made in wheat protein chemistry in this period. And then moving on to higher resolution methods, but also more convenient methods. In the old days, we were casting gels in rods. We're then casting gels in cassettes. Now we just order gels, they come by post. HPLC systems, we were still running paper chromatographs for a lot of work till Jerry Beets and his colleagues started using HPLC. And then things like the capillary electrophoresis, where you can automate and you can start reducing sort of patterns to data as well. One of the problems with electrophoresis has always been getting real numbers out of these separations. And it's just as difficult now as it was 30 years ago to get meaningful results from some of these systems. And then gluten protein sequences. I went to California for a year in 1979 to work with Don Quesada. At that time, there were two groups working with sequencing. There was Don's group in Albany, and there was Jerry Beets at Peoria. And I thought Albany was going to be a nicer year than Peoria, I'm sorry. And I had a really good year, but they were doing work in parallel. I wouldn't say that 10 years later, when Don got the complete sequence, he'd aged that much. That's a more recent photograph. But it did wear him down pretty badly, trying to get through classical protein sequencing of these complicated, repetitive gluten proteins. But then everything opened up. You could do things with kits, high throughput systems. Proteomics, this is work from Australia, from Skylas and Colin Wrigley's group. Colin was one of the great technical innovators, as well as scientific innovators. And being able to break proteins down into individual components, and then aided by advancing mass spectroscopy, being able to identify them. So the whole thing was driven by genomics, the availability of sequences, the availability of mass spec systems for protein analysis, and these high resolution 2D systems. I always tell my students that we were running these gels 25 years ago, and a lot of people still run them. There's still a way a lot of people do their proteomics. So the technologies move forward, but it's still very labor intensive. There have been some success stories. Peter Payne in the late 1970s started working on the association of gluten proteins with quality at the old PBI in Cambridge, and he established the association with the glutenase subunits with quality. At that time, they accounted for something like 70% of the variation in quality in European wheats. And they were taken up and they were used globally in wheat breeding, and they still are, certainly in the UK. Having said that, I think probably they did us a disadvantage because everyone thought the quality was solved. Since then, it's been very difficult to get people interested in quality because they think glutenase subunits have solved the problem for them, but of course they haven't. There's various structural models. We did a lot of work in my own group on them. That's one model that was developed by ourselves and collaborators. But as I say in a few minutes, we still don't understand them, I think, in the detail we should. On the other hand, you can use it. This is Julie Seekins, who worked with Peter, still works in a plant breeding company in Cambridge. This is her biscuit wheat, where you take all the glutenase subunits out and it effectively falls apart. I'm not sure it was ever used for making biscuits, but it's a nice illustration of the way you can get almost infinitely extensible dough by just manipulating the protein composition. And it underpins the reason why people still use protein composition in breeding. And then Philip Greenwell. I saw Philip earlier this week, and he persuaded me to use a newer photograph. I'm not sure it's any more flattering than the one that I had. In 1986, Philip, working at what was then Chorleywood, established the link between fibrillin, starch granule surface proteins in wheat and grain texture. Followed on great deeds by Craig Morris, by Mike Gillot and other colleagues, also people in other countries, France particularly. But Philip, I think, never ever really got the credit that he should have done. He wasn't the most self-promoting person, but one of the most thoughtful and intelligent people I've ever worked with over the years. They account for 70% of the variation in texture, but I don't think they're used extensively in breeding because texture is fairly easy to handle. We have variation and it's fairly easy to work with. On the other hand, I think we still don't understand mechanisms of either of these systems. We don't understand 3D structure of gluten. We have models. Everyone has their own model. We like to trot out our models at meetings, but we don't really understand them. We've never really resolved the roles of different stabilizing forces, hydrogen bonds, disulfide bonds. We spent a lot of time in my group working on elastic mechanism, but there's still a lot unproved. How is it assembled? What's the role of the environment? How can you increase the stability by controlling these processes? And in the case of pure indolins, there's still no structures. We know they interact with starch, we know they interact with lipids, but we don't know to what extent those are related and to what extent lipid binding affects starch interaction. So I think we learned a lot about how we can use them, but probably less about how they work. And there's still a lot of work to do, but they're not easy systems. I've been talking a bit about wheat gluten. I'll say that's what I know about. Let's say a few words about impact of genomics, because the second half of the 50 years has really been the genomic era, and trying to assess how far we've actually come in cereal genomics and been able to benefit from them. The context is, we need to increase production. This is one of Derek Stewart's slides from Dundee. It shows the global trends in increasing yields of cereals, but underneath you can see the global population. So obviously the increasing yields are not keeping up with the global population, and that's the challenge for the future. And that's where genomics should be helping us to actually achieve these. Starting from 2002, we now have pretty well all the genome sequences. I put wheat down there. We don't have an ordered wheat sequence, but we have a usable sequence. We can go in and we can find the genes that we want. So we know a lot about genome sequences of cereals, but have they really been any benefit to us over the past 20 years? I think the big benefit's been on speeding up breeding. What they've allowed us to do is establish new marker systems for breeders. So whether you're breeding for yield or for quality or for pathogen resistance or for another trait, you can establish markers quickly. They're getting cheaper and cheaper. And as you can see from the slide here, this is provided by a UK breeding company. The cost per marker has gone down dramatically. The cost of field markers, on the other hand, has not changed, because field markers, you're screening sort of phenotype, and you can't reduce the cost. But using molecular markers has reduced the cost tremendously. And what it's enabled us to do is have a lot more data points. And now people are starting to do breeding by genome sequencing and genome selection. So there's been a big impact on breeding in terms of the efficiency, being able to identify the traits you want, select for them, and get them through into your breeding populations. Earlier this afternoon, I was involved in a session on transgenesis and where are we going, what's the benefits been. And of course, there's been tremendous global adoption of GM traits. If you look at the left hand, it shows the 4 major crops: sugar beet, canola. Actually, I can't count, can I? Sugar beet, canola, cotton, soybean, and maize. And particularly, the adoption for different traits: herbicide-resistant, insect-resistant, stack traits. But in the case of cereals, this has been on maize and not in other cereals. It's really been in the Americas, North and South America, also I think to probably China to some extent, and not Europe. And of course, it's been focused on input traits which benefit the farmers, agrochemical companies, and not consumers. And so I think it's been disappointing, the impact. There's been a lot of work in the lab on delivering benefits to consumers. High amylose wheat, work at CSIRO, Matthew Morell's group. The famous golden rice, we talked about that this afternoon. Why is golden rice gone nowhere in the last 10 or 15 years? It's mineral biofortification, but none of this was translated into actual benefits. But on the other hand, advances have been made in other crops. In soybean, particularly oil composition, oil quality in soybean. There are enhanced soybean varieties, high oleic varieties, high omega-3 fatty acid varieties, and they're commercially produced, so you can do it if the market's there, and if the acceptability is there. There's a couple of barriers. The barrier in Europe is acceptability. This is not assigning blame to countries, but this is a rather interesting slide a colleague gave me, showing how different European countries have voted on GM traits. And I'll just highlight two. These are the same traits. In the UK, we've voted yes 17 times. We've voted no once. In Austria, exactly the same traits, they've voted no 18 times. So these are countries presented with the same scientific data. They make a decision whether they'll accept the crop or not. And what this is showing us is that, we're not looking at scientific decisions, they're political decisions or ethical decisions. But acceptability across Europe is a real problem. And the way it's changing is that countries will, I think, become independent in terms of accepting or not. So the UK will accept GM crops, other countries won't. But of course, that makes it very difficult for marketing and for trade. Of course, the second barrier is the cost of regulation. Slide from a few years ago showing the cost of a GM event all the way through from production to getting it into the marketplace. At that time, it was $7 to $15 million per event. So you've got to be pretty certain that event's important. You can get your money back before you even start doing any GM crops. So we have to get the cost of regulation down and perhaps regulate GM crops the same way we regulate other foods rather than the way we regulate pharmaceuticals, which tends to be the case nowadays. And we have new breeding technologies coming through which may help. These are various ways. People are trying to get around this barrier of acceptability. They're trying to get away from having foreign DNA, they're doing things like genome editing, sort of mutagenesis in vivo. And in strict terms, you can produce a plant with no foreign DNA. And so the debate there is whether it's about the process or the product. The product can be identical, but the process could be what people object to. And I think we still need to see whether these will affect acceptability, certainly in Europe. And then for the last part of my talk, a little bit on diet and health, because I think that's the most important topic at the moment and the one that we should be focusing on for the future. I'll talk mainly about wheat, because I think most of the diet and health problems that we've discussed have been in relation to wheat and to a lesser extent to rye and other small grain cereals. And it's a mixture of mythical and real health problems. On the left-hand side, there's a slide showing increase in celiac disease in the US population. We'll talk about that later. Concern about increased incidences of celiac, related intolerances, allergies, and in gluten sensitivity. And again, I'll talk about these in a minute. And then other negative effects associated with obesity and other conditions. People always ask about the wheat belly book. As far as I can see, there's no evidence base. Other people have looked at it in more detail than me, particularly Julie Miller-Jones and Fred Brauns, and tried to refute some of the claims. But there's no doubt it's had a big impact. And a lot of people, if a book's written by an MD, tend to think that it's going to be good science. But it's very difficult to refute things which get to be so popular. But there's no denying there are negative responses to wheat. I'll try to summarize the range of conditions that people are concerned about, wheat-related disorders. Allergies, fairly easily diagnosed because they're IgE-mediated. Intolerances, again, you can diagnose because they're autoimmune, sort of T-cell mediated, and then non-immune related conditions which are very, very difficult, which I'll come back to. Celiac disease is the most well-known and the most well-studied, and we've made tremendous advances in 50 years in celiac disease. When you think that wheat was identified as a trigger in the Netherlands in 1950, gliadin as a trigger in 1952, particularly from the 1970s, characterizing the proteins, Don Quesada and colleagues, and then various groups, Ludwig Solid in the Netherlands, in Norway, Fritz Koenig in Leiden, Kosler at Stanford, and various others looking at the pathogenesis. So we understand celiac disease pretty well nowadays. And people are now trying to apply this knowledge in, perhaps not developing celiac-safe wheats, but reduced toxicity wheats for celiac patients by looking at epitopes and trying to remove them or to at least reduce the number. So I think it's been a real success story. On the other hand, if you go to a celiac meeting, almost every slide will be the celiac iceberg. And the big debate is it really an iceberg? Is there really 90% below the surface and we're only looking at the top 10%? I think we're beginning to understand it better. This is based on a talk I went to from someone at Sheffield earlier this year on the case in the UK. And it's based on antibody screen followed by biopsy. And the big change in celiac was being able to diagnose using an antibody to tissue transglutaminase and then use biopsy afterwards. And the occurrence with this system is about 1% in the UK population. The other big change was the recognition that it's an adult condition rather than paediatric. And in the UK, about 9 times more prevalent in adults than children. Previously, it was only ever diagnosed in children, and it was missed in most adults. 7 times more undiagnosed than diagnosed, so you pick it up with the antibody. The common of this presentation is 40 to 60, not children. It may not have any negative effects on function, but it does have increased risk of other conditions. So once you find it, you have to treat it, and the only way you can treat it is by withdrawing gluten from the diet. So before you start doing large-scale screening, you have to really think about where you want to go with it. So it has increased in incidence, but whether that is just improved diagnosis or whether there's a genuine increase, I think is difficult to establish. Other weight-related conditions, I think the two interesting ones are schizophrenia and autism. There's been work, particularly in the UK, but other countries in North America, on changing diets. And you do get changes in behaviour patterns. So there's something there. So non-celiac wheat sensitivity, I've no doubt there's something there as well in some people. But the problem with these conditions is there's no known immunological basis, the diagnosis is unclear, and the incidence is not known. I mean, I get out of bed in the morning feeling terrible a lot of days, but I don't stop eating wheat. I'm sure if I did, I'd probably feel better for a day, and then I'd stop eating wheat for the rest of my life. So it's at that level, a lot of diagnosis. But on the other hand, there's something there, I'm sure. It's just we don't know how important it is. But then switching on to something a bit more positive sort of benefits. The big advance in the last 15 years, I think, has been the increase in evidence base for effects of cereal fibre, particularly on reduced risk of various chronic diseases. This is just screenshots of various papers, mainly meta-analyses showing reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes and obesity. And you can find exactly the same sort of number of papers and evidence base for reduced risk of cancer. So there's mainly bowel cancer, but also breast cancer and other forms of cancer, but particularly colorectal cancer. So again, there's something there, and you can at least get some take-home messages. This is from Janet Cade at Leeds, who's an epidemiologist. Some of the take-home messages, 10% reduction in risk of colon cancer with 10 grams a day of cereal fibre, whole grain fibre. 5% reduction in risk of breast cancer with 10 grams a day. In this case, soluble fibre, and risk of stroke reduced. Difficult to compare because people compare different fractions. Some are whole grain, some are wheat, some are soluble. But the evidence base is building up. And this is reflected, I think, in the rise of whole grain and the acceptance of health claims. Here I'd like to acknowledge Kaiser. I know she's not here at the moment. She's one of the many people that apologise for going home before my talk. But Kaiser has been, and they may have been very wise, actually, in retrospect. But Kaiser has been very influential in the launch of whole grain, particularly in Europe, and getting it accepted. Running the health grain program, the health grain forum since, but also initiatives in other countries, particularly North America. And this has been one of the really positive results of research, I think. And it's led to accepted health claims. FDA health claims, I find the FDA website is very opaque. I can't get a clear list. I like the EFSA website because it lists whether it's a claim or not and whether it's accepted. EFSA has about 150 claims for foods, and about 10% of those are related to fibre, particularly cereal fibre. And there are claims for things like reduced glycemic response, intestinal transit time, fecal bulk, reduced blood cholesterol, risk of heart disease. So these are, and if it gets through EFSA and FDA, I think the evidence base is pretty strong. So I think this is very positive for the future. And of course, it's underpinned by a lot of science. I've tried to think of cell wall, carbohydrate biochemists, and I filled up a slide and gave up. So I probably offended a lot of people by missing them out. So John Cummings, a European English scientist, I think really showed the colon actually worked rather than being a waste disposal system, that it did useful things. And I think Bruce Stone was a great pioneer and also a great person to work with. Per Eman was really formalised some methods for dietary fibre analysis, amongst other things. And then a few people of varying ages along the bottom there. Peter Wood on the right-hand side, beta-glucan, who died a couple of years ago. But that's the challenge of trying not to forget someone, at least someone who's in the room, and I'm sure I have forgotten some people. So what are the challenges for whole grain? Well, we don't understand mechanisms. We're beginning to understand mechanisms of fibre. Phytochemicals are still a black box. It's easy to say that things are antioxidants, therefore they're good for you, but detailed mechanisms, I think we still have very little information, and we need to be able to provide convincing mechanisms which will back up health claims. Otherwise, they disappear from the labels altogether, and the benefits will be lost. I don't think we're so good at communicating benefits. People still think fruit and vegetables are good for them. I think whole grain is better for you. I'm sure everyone in this room agrees, but we've not communicated that message as well as other sectors. We need to improve the processing to get attractive products. We're always going to have bloating. We're always going to have gas production. That's all part of the fun. But we can market these things better. So we need to increase the acceptability, and we need to reduce the costs so that people who need health benefits can afford them. One thing that always concerns me is that it's very cheap to eat badly, but more expensive to eat well. And the people that need the benefits are the people who can't afford it very often, so we need to get the cost down as well as acceptability. And then, like most people, I like to show off at the end with some global challenges. In Europe particularly, we have high production. We need to increase yield potential, but what we really need to do is to actually to reduce the reliance on inputs. And I think this is probably the same globally, particularly nitrogen inputs and crop protection chemicals. And the real challenge, I think, for quality is to increase the stability. If you ask most plant breeders whether they like an increase in quality or an increase in stability, they go for stability nowadays. I do field work, and every year is different now. In the past, you could do 3 years experiments and bulk the data. Now you have 3 years separate data sets, and you have to treat them separately. So increasing yield and stability in relation to the changing climate with climate change, and particularly in relation to quality. And then, as I said earlier, we need to deliver improved health benefits in affordable products and do more on understanding allergies, intolerances, and these undefined health conditions. I've no idea how long I've talked for. I'm sure it's too long. Just a couple of words about, I came across this picture from one of Del Meekum's papers from 1980, and it defines what we're doing today. We're looking at protein characterization still, protein interactions, we don't understand them. Protein biosynthesis we understand, but not really how it's controlled in terms of environment, to genome evolution and structure, and on the right-hand side, the things that concern the USDA lab in 1980. Again, the things that concern us today. So we've moved forward, but a lot of the basic problems still remain, and this was 35 years ago. And then thanks. One person I'd like to thank is Don Casada. I worked with Don for a year in 1979. He's been a good friend and colleague for the last 35 years. Gave me a lot of help with preparing the talk, including providing pictures. I've tried to mention other friends and colleagues going through, but I've been in the business for 40 years now, so it's difficult to remember everybody. And I'm sure I've missed people. And I asked people for slides, and Colin Wrigley sent me a slide I couldn't use, so I put it at the end. I thought it was so good. I thought it was so good that I had to use it somewhere. So I thought I'd put it at the end. I wish I could think of something like this for the UK. So thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Very nice overview on the last 30 years of last 40, nope, 50 years. So already of my life, huh? You have addressed the most important things and also for the future. And Devin and I want to give a short wrap-up of what we thought would be terms of the last 50 years and also terms for the future. Several weeks ago, we thought about how to end this meeting, and we looked just for important terms and wrote them down just as you see him, and perhaps you feel associated with one or the other of them. It's just subjective, but still these are important today. So this is what we thought about the last 50 years. And in a minute, Devin will briefly speak about the future.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very excited about what we have coming. I hope you agree that this has been an excellent meeting. We've had opportunities to go to our excellent scientific sessions and learn new things. I hope you've also had the chance to interact with colleagues and meet new people. Over the past 2 meetings, we've had the opportunity to look back at the significant accomplishments of our forefathers in cereal science. I personally am in awe of the significant contributions of these individuals to our field. As we end this meeting, we have the opportunity to look forward, to celebrate what the next century will bring. What new discoveries will be made? What new technologies will be developed? On the screen, you see several new important trends that will be important in the future. As we look forward, it will be critical for us to look at problems in a new way. We must not be complacent or afraid to try new things. We need to address issues around feeding a population that is growing in both number and size. It will be increasingly important to be transdisciplinary in our approaches and include teams from industry, academia, and government. I invite you now to our centennial meeting next year to help shape the future of cereal science. I'd also remind you that the 2015 symposium proposals can be submitted on the website through November 4th. So get those submissions in. Thank you.
Next year, AACCI will head to the Midwest for the 2015 Centennial Meeting from October 18th to the 21st in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our meeting program team is already hard at work assembling another strong science-filled program. And the Centennial Meeting will be a launch pad for the next 100 years. So please mark these dates in your calendar and be a face of the future. Now, just before I finish the script, I'm going to depart from it for a moment because I want, on your behalf, to thank the people in this room who make all this possible. I'm talking about all the people in the blue shirts, all the headquarters staff. Could they please stand up? More than ever at this conference that I've been exposed to all the different program planning and events. I appreciate all their efforts and input. So, it just remains for me to thank you all for your participation and support. Without you, none of this would be possible. And I look forward to celebrating our centennial with you next year in Minneapolis. So thank you and a safe journey home.